In our last episode, people were not obeying the spread forth and multiply. Instead, they made this city, the city of Babel. They made a giant tower in the city trying to reach to the heavens. God had to come in and veto that, so that didn't end up going through. And when the languages were all created at that point in time, people were no longer able to communicate with each other, so they split up and formed their own countries and nations and cities. Although it's usually in the reverse. They make the cities, then the cities become nations, and yeah, right, small to big, big to small, whatever, whatever. And then we had a nice genealogy leading down to Abram, who's kind of a star character in the Old Testament. One of the ones that everybody talks about, although we usually talk about him in a different name, but that comes later. But for now, we're going to start with Genesis 12:1. Now, in Haran, the Lord said to Abram, "Go for yourself, for your own advantage, away from your country, from your relatives, and your father's house, to the land that I will show you." So here we go. God's communicating with Abram, and he's got something for him, and he's going to explain what that is. Genesis 12:2. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you with abundant increase of favors, and make your name famous and distinguished. And you will be a blessing, dispensing blessings to others. What is this great nation? Oh, you don't have to look very far. It's in the Middle East. It's interesting. I guess that's a spoiler. We're gonna watch our spoilers on this, but will he make the deal or won't he make the deal? Because this is a transactional deal, right? You know, Abram has to leave his father's house and trust that wherever God's going to take him is going to lead to all these things that God is promising him. And there's more too. Genesis 12:3. And I will bless those who bless you, who confer prosperity or happiness upon you, and curse him who curses or uses insolent language towards you. In you, with all the families and kindred of the earth will be blessed, and by you they will bless themselves. So there we go. This is kind of one of the most significant lines in the Bible. Well, I don't know if it is or it isn't. It's definitely significant as far as people's relationship to God and the blessings that God bestows upon people and the nations. For many nations treat this nation that God is creating here in Abram very poorly, and as a result, it doesn't end well. And there's other ones that have treated this nation very favorably and have been blessed exceedingly. Of course, that would probably be more clear if I didn't want to, no spoilers. We're not going to have spoilers because it just builds up. Oh, this part's exciting. Yeah. And this is what the deal is, right? Abram has the choice. He can either sit at home and do nothing, or he can obey God, go to the land that God is going to show him, and receive the blessings that God is offering him here in this communication, right? He has the choice. He can choose either way. We already know what he's going to do because we're in the future. But I'm sure to Abram this was a big deal, right? He had to leave home. He had to leave, his father's house. When they talk about father's house, this isn't just a building, right? This is like more than that, right? Because houses used to be like families, right? That it's like, I guess they still are families. His father probably had all this stuff going on there, had servants and maid servants and he donkeys and whatever, right? So it would have been like a small community, or maybe it was even like a city, right? That I guess it was in Haran. So it was in the city of Haran. His father was probably very prosperous and had a lot going on. So it's not like he was dirt poor and had his coat on his back and that was all he had. He had things of substance, and he would have had things that he would have earned, but his father's house probably had a tremendous amount with it as well, and whatever his sibling situation goes, right? Because families had to stick together a lot more in that era, and culturally as well. It's different than now. Now you own nothing and you will be happy, as it has been proclaimed. But back in those days, people actually owned things. They would work and they would receive possessions and they would accumulate wealth and disperse the wealth to their kids or whatever. And societies would grow from that. It's kind of the seed of creation in the sense of urban planning, right? Like, so yeah. So you had a choice, right? It's because it's like you leave everything that you have, and it's not like you necessarily know what's going to be there, and it's not like he could Google Maps and see what the land is going to look like, and have no understanding of just going out into the wilderness almost, having no perceptual understanding of the destination that he was going to, right? This isn't going to the town that's one town over from you to go get something at the Walmart. This is something much more elaborate and devastating. This is going into new territory, kind of on your own, and trusting in God that He's going to deliver you. So it's not an easy choice to make, even with all those promises. But it's like, well, what's a promise if you don't trust the one making the promise, right? But Abram obviously had some degree of a relationship with God, that he trusted him enough to, see that this was going to be beneficial. Or it was greed, but I think it was more so the trust aspect, that he had enough relationship with God that he trusted him that he was going to fulfill his promise. And I mean, he's kind of promising him the world here. It's a lot. A lot. I don't know if he's a character too. We'll see. Genesis 12:4. So Abram departed as the Lord had directed him. And Lot, his nephew, went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. So the city of Haran, or whatever it is, city, town, country, all those things are just, they don't really mean anything. Right? It's like, well, how big is a town, or how big is a village before it's a town, and how big is a town before it's a city, and how big is a city before it is a super city? Is a super city a thing? I don't know if it is. Capital city, the city of the province, a provincial city. Oh man, getting exciting. So here we are. He's in his 70. He's 75 years old. He's leaving home. So I guess he's not young. So he would have had, well, maybe that was young then. People lived a lot longer. This is like he is 17, right? 17 years old, leaving home, doesn't know what to expect, and he's got some level of life experience, and he's worked for whatever period of time, so he does have some possessions, and he's gonna take those along with him. Genesis 12:5. Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all of their possessions that they had gathered, and the person's servants that they had acquired in Haran. And they went forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, that's kind of weird how they spaced that out. It's kind of just got a comma on the end. I should point out too, the more obvious thing that I just completely missed. He left his family. And in those days, family's the most important thing. Still should be today. Anyway, 12:6. Abram passed through the land to the locality of Shechem, to the oak or terebinth tree of Moreh, and the Canaanites was then in the land. So, a couple things here. The Canaanites were in the land of Canaan. Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. You name the land after the people and the people after the land, or however that works, right? We go back a little bit in Genesis. We see, we can see who the father of Canaan is, and then we know that he settled in that area, and then the people that are the descendant of him, the descendants of Canaan are the Canaanites. The land that Canaan was in, that becomes Canaan. And this is kind of a consistent thing throughout the Bible when it talks about certain locations with regards to biblical prophecy and knowing which place is in what area. We just look at who of Noah's sons or sons originally settled in the area, then we know for historical context where that land is. Because when we look at the places' names, they change all the time depending on who the rulers are, and stuff gets renamed. Uh, is it the Gulf of Trump or whatever we got going on now? That's probably not going to age well. Gulf of America, trying to rename the, what is it? Not the Gulf Stream. What is that? What is that river called? Gulf of Mexico. Trying to rename it. It's just kind of ridiculous, but that's how those things work. Like before the Gulf of Mexico was there, the locals probably had a name for it, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't the Gulf of Mexico. They didn't even know of golf back then. Golf didn't even exist as a sport. They couldn't manufacture golf balls, so it was just kind of impossible. But the big thing is who's there first, not second, right? It's the original person. Sorry, I just keep thinking of that Abbott Costello uh, baseball joke now with who's on first, and the guy's name is who, and he's on the first base. It's kind of silly and funny, but that's the way to kind of think about it. Is that the original person that settled the land is who the land should be named after, and that's what they do in the Bible. And it makes it very simple. We don't need to know who conquered it and when they conquered it, and then who conquered them, or when did that civilization fall, and nobody even knows who they are. What is it? Sargon of Akkad. Akkad or whatever it was, the nation of it. It was like this mythical thing, and then they like found it like not too long ago, right? It was like this like empire that they didn't know where it like existed, if it really existed, but then archaeology finally were able to locate where that was. And I mean, stuff like that happens all the time, that we have things that people just assume because it's common knowledge, they never write it down, so it doesn't get written down, and then it gets lost, and then a couple 100 years goes by and you can never find where it was. So that's just kind of how that works. And this naming it by the person that first settles it is a way of kind of removing a lot of that frustration. This type of tree or whatever it is, this is just kind of a significant marker. It's probably a pretty cool looking tree, I would assume, to use it as a marker, but it comes up again later on, so there is significance to it. It's not just some random tree with a name that I butchered the pronunciation of probably severely. I think I got the oak part right, because it's an oak, or I guess if I repeat myself, I have to repeat it the exact same way. That way I have confidence and it sounds more correct. But it is some type of tree, some sort of oak or caranbiff tree. There's some significance to that. We'll come back to that later on, and it's just kind of like a precursor. That's the only reason why that detail is in there, to my understanding anyway. It is there as a marker of significance. Genesis 12 and 7. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your prosperity. So Abram built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. So he built an altar and he appeared before him. I could be wrong, but this could be another barbecue event. A communion with the Lord, burnt sacrifice, getting the fat cooking on the altar, and just kind of a communion, a relationship building event between the Lord and Abram. The Lord's like, well, this is the land, right? He's pointing out what the land is. Maybe they're on a hill, they're looking down into a valley or whatever, and they can kind of see what Canaan looks like. I don't really know what it looks like, but that could be how the event's going down. I like to try to visualize these things and just kind of imagine, and probably often get them way wrong and maybe looking into something too far, not far enough. That's just how that works. So I just kind of the way I picture this is that Abram gets to this spot, he gets to this wonderful place, and then the Lord appears to him, maybe in the flesh. Maybe this is one of those events where God comes down and they're able to talk face to face, or came as a cloud, or vision or a dream. We don't really know what the method was, but I could see some sort of scenario where Abram's building this altar. Did he get the servants to make it? Did he make it himself? I think he would have done it himself. I think he would have put the effort in himself, and Maybe the servants were off in the distance doing their own thing, getting ready for the next day to hike up for a little bit more. Lot's probably there doing his own thing. And Abram is just, he's got this altar, and the Lord appears before him. And they communicate. And I don't know. I'm sure they had a good time. Genesis 12 and 8. From there he pulled up his tent pegs and departed to the mountains to the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. So is this a second altar that he made, or was this just reaffirming the details of the first one? I don't know. I kind of think it's like he went there, communicated with God who appeared before him, and then the next day he moved and built another altar maybe and communicated, or maybe this was all kind of one event. He pitched the tent, made the altar, communicated with the Lord. It's hard to say because it's a translated work, and a lot of the poetic language is kind of lost in the translation, and some of the subtle details, the details between the lines and the spaces between the letters is lost. So we don't really know for sure how that went down. We just know that, Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. I don't know how they pronounce I. I think it's I, but that sounds interesting. Anyway, I digress. The journey to get to Canaan as well was likely arduous and long. It kind of just happens instantaneously and within a couple lines where it occurs, but it could have been a very long, difficult trek, difficult journey, especially when you're bringing along the servants and all these possessions to go to this newfound place, right? There was no paved roads, there was no cars, and it was likely a little bit challenging. So to have that communication and fellowship with God there with the altar was probably just a tremendously emotionally powerful event that we could just gloss right over because it doesn't really say that much about it, but I'm sure it was amazing. One of the greatest times in history. 12 and 9. Abram journeyed on, still going towards the south. Negev. The Negev? Whatever that is, that's some sort of place, I guess. The Negev area. Genesis 12:10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to live temporarily, for the famine in the land was oppressive. So we have a severe famine in the area, and Abram's idea is to just leave. Go down, maybe just for a little while, go down to Egypt, where Egypt was the breadbasket of the world in that era. Kind of similar to how Ukraine is nowadays, well, kind of. But, so he's going down to Egypt, and he's got a plan. He's just going to go down there, they're going to be down there until the famine goes away, and then they'll be able to go back up to the promised land. At least that is the plan. And this famine was probably really severe. He probably looked at the land, and if there's people there, they're probably all starving. The Canaanites were probably starving there, and the animals as well. And it was probably like one of those times when you go to look at a place like the grass around here, I guess, for instance. When there's been a drought for a while, all the grass gets all gray and doesn't have that green, luscious energy to it. So the plants around probably looked all kind of dying and withered, and he's just looking at it. He's like, maybe later. Maybe just for a season. 12 and 11. And when they were about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know you are beautiful to behold. So he knows that his wife is a very good-looking woman. At least that's, maybe he's just boasting, but maybe there's some more to this. So we'll see in Genesis 12:12. So when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. So they're going to kill him, and take his wife. That's what he's afraid of. So this is the master scheme, the master plan of Abram. This is his solution to prevent his untimely death at the hand of those Egyptians. Genesis 12:13. Say, I beg of you, that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. So that's quite the elaborate plan. But as we'll see, he doesn't die, so I guess you could say it was effective in that sense. But at the same time, it kind of shows a lack of faith in God that He could preserve them. I mean, God probably could have preserved them without having to go to Egypt, but it was like He saw the famine and just decided to leave. That even though God promised all those things, that if He got there, right, He just he's trusting in Himself, so He does this detour to Egypt, and then He gets into Egypt, and now He's doing this deception act. Whether or not she was His sister or not has no bearing in that. This was an intentional attempt to deceive for self-preservation due to a lack of faith that God could deliver him. So it is what it is. Genesis 12:14. And when Abram came into Egypt, the Egyptians saw the woman was very beautiful. He wasn't lying. She was a good looker, and that they would want her. Genesis 12:15. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into Pharaoh's harem. So here we go. Abram just lost his wife. She has been taken into the harem of the Pharaoh. This is very bad. Abram at this point in time, he is, he's not as strong as he becomes later on. He is, a little bit weak of character in this respect. He wasn't able to protect his wife. Maybe lacking a little bit in faith in the Lord, that the Lord could deliver him. And he came up with this little ruse about the sister thing, and it just wasn't the best situation. He could have probably done a lot better, but in many cases, the struggling and the hard times are what builds character to create a better person, right? And Abram is going to learn from this experience, and he is going to become better as a result of it. It's just a rough situation, but there will be good that comes from it in the growth that will occur in Abram down the line. But this is just weird. Having your wife be in another man's harem is just disgusting. I mean, harems are kind of disgusting to begin with, but you have your wife in another man's, man, this isn't going to go well. Genesis 12:16. And he treated Abram for her sake. He acquired sheep, oxen, he-donkeys, manservants, maidservants, she-donkeys, and camels. So we got Abram getting a bribe. It's like, here, we're taking your sister, and you're going to have all this stuff. So Abram accepted a bribe from the Pharaoh and acquired a lot of material wealth. So, it's not the best character, is it? Yeah, that's just, Genesis 12:17. But the Lord scourged Pharaoh and his household with serious plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So here we go. Abram's not able to do anything. The Lord sees this. He doesn't like what's going on. He doesn't want anything like this going on. So he's going to get out the old rod of correction and give Pharaoh a couple whacks. Severe plague. So what do we got going on there? Are these just boils and things on the skin? Is this going to be a plague of the, what do you call that, agriculture, where you eat a bunch of like frogs or whatever and just ruining the harvest? It doesn't really specify what these exact plagues are. Later on, much later on, we have another event going to Egypt, and it also has plagues, but they're all spelled out. Whether or not the plagues at this juncture in time are similar to those ones, it's hard to say. God has a lot of creativity. He made everything that there is to have been made. So, he can be pretty creative in his plagues that he casts upon. I'm sure they were interesting in their own way. Interesting as an outsider, not interesting to be a victim of. And the Pharaoh is not having a good time. These plagues, it's probably, he's pulling out his hair. This is just crazy what's going on. Maybe he's already bald. It's hard to say. He could add the plague of baldness. Genesis 12:18. The Pharaoh called, and Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife?" So somebody must have spilled the beans. Pharaoh knows now that, she is his wife. So maybe he asked her, what's the deal here? Why the second is she in the harem that everything is just falling apart, going haywire? What is going on here? And maybe she spilled the beans. Maybe some of the servants of Abram spilled the beans, or who knows? Who knows what happened? Beans were definitely spilled, and Pharaoh found out. Then again, maybe not a whole lot was going on, and that was the only thing that changed. It's like everything was all peachy. They were growing lots of grain in the breadbasket of the world in Egypt, and then Abram comes down here, and then everything just falls apart the second that he's there. And it's like, well, who's this mysterious visitor to town? And it's like, oh, that's Abram. He's kind of a cool dude. Yeah, we gave him a bunch of free stuff, and we took his sister. It's like, oh, we took his sister. And then, I don't know how the dissertation of investigation occurred in that spontaneous instance. But either way, Pharaoh found out what was going on. He didn't want to know. He's like, what's going on? Why didn't you tell me? If you would have told me, we wouldn't have took your wife. But, who's to say that if he did tell them that they wouldn't have killed him, right? Maybe Abram was right in that respect. I don't think that would have been the case. I think the Lord would have preserved him in the same way that the Lord preserved his wife Sarai in this instance by throwing down these plagues left, right, and center on the Pharaoh. So I think God definitely had a plan, and he was ready to protect them. But Abram, rather than trusting into God, trusted in his own self and his own wit, and he came up with this ruse to try to deceive them. And it is very likely, I think it does say that Sarai is his sister. So we got a little bit of the, marrying your sister thing going on there. But at this juncture in time, the whole marrying your sister and the incest with regards to genetic deformities didn't seem to be an issue. But then again, they were living to 1,000 years back then. So maybe it did cause problems, and that's why we don't live very long today. It's hard to say. Maybe we are the incest generation, and that's just the result of what's happened from the multiple generations till we had enough diversity over the spread that it didn't become an issue anymore, and it kind of stopped getting worse at a certain point. And, because there was enough people to have enough diversity, whatever. But either way, they lived a lot longer then than we do now, so obviously we are weaker than they are then. And I mean, you got Abram here. What was he, 75 when he started this journey? He's probably a little bit older now, but that's an old man where I come from. Maybe in the future that people will live longer, but yeah. Still going at it though, I guess. Genesis 12:19. Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and get away. So there we go. We are being kicked out of Egypt. Abram and his wife and their servants and possessions or whatever. It doesn't talk about taking their possessions as like a ransom or anything. They're just, get out of here, just be gone. They don't even care. They're not trying to extort. They're not trying to get the last little bit. Obviously, the plagues that were put on Pharaoh were severe enough not to try to get the best deal imaginable. So just get out. Take your wife. Get out of here. And he's still upset that, it's like, why did you do that? It's all this unnecessary suffering occurred just because he wasn't honest. and it created a lot of suffering in a lot of different people. And it's just kind of one of those. It's kind of a weird story because it's just, why is that in here? What are we supposed to glean from this? And I don't really know, but it is kind of funny. Like, it's just, she's my sister. You get all these plagues, and then they get kicked out of Egypt. It's just, it adds color to the story, color to the character that is Abram and Sarai. It's like one of their misadventures, right? On their journey following, God and God's command or deal or whatever. That we have these little side events, side stories, and I'm sure Abram grew as a person as a result of this. Same with Sarai, and this was an interesting way of escaping that famine. Here's your wife, and take her and get out of here. Genesis 12:20, and Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they brought him on his way with his wife and all that he had. So they didn't take anything from him. They just gave him everything he had. Maybe they gave him, some food for the road and just get out of here immediately, and get this plague out of here because it's just making everybody miserable. So that's what we got there. We got our first little adventure with Abram, and it won't be our last one because, man, Abram is just quite a guy, but this is here to show his growth. This is where Abram kind of starts and kind of him building up into what God wants him to be so that he can be the father of this great, mighty nation. Till next time.